I walked out into my backyard just after sunrise, coffee still warm in my hand, and for a second, I honestly thought I was looking at the wrong house. The fence was gone. Not broken. Not leaning. Gone. Like someone had just erased it overnight. And zip-tied to the post where my gate used to be was a white envelope with my name on it, along with a bill for $14,872.63. My name's Aaron Keller. I'm 43 years old, licensed civil engineer, been working land development and zoning compliance in Wake County, North Carolina for a little over 17 years now, which is probably why this whole thing still pisses me off more than it should. Because I knew exactly what I was looking at that morning. And I knew, immediately, something about it didn't add up. But before I get there, you need to understand what that fence actually meant. It wasn't just lumber and nails. That fence was 138 linear feet of pressure-treated pine, 6 feet tall, set in concrete every 8 feet, hand-measured, hand-leveled, something I built with a contractor buddy of mine over 3 weekends in late September, right after my daughter Lucy turned 8. Cost me $7,940 all in materials, labor, permits. And yeah, I pulled permits. I always pull permits. That fence went up after a neighbor's dog jumped the old split rail and snapped at Lucy while she was playing in the yard. Didn't break skin, but it scared the hell out of her. And if you've got kids, you know that kind of thing sticks. So I built that fence so my daughter could play outside without looking over her shoulder. So yeah, it mattered. We lived in a subdivision called Brook Hollow Ridge, about 20 minutes outside Raleigh. Built early 2000s, 72 homes, quiet, mostly families, a couple retirees, the usual. We had an HOA, of course we did. But for the first 2 years we lived there, they were mostly invisible. A newsletter here, a reminder about trash bins there, nothing crazy. Then about a year ago, a new HOA president took over. Her name was Sharon Whitlock. Mid-50s, always dressed like she was headed to a real estate open house even if she was just checking mail. Drove a silver Acura MDX that always looked freshly detailed, the kind of person who smiled at you with her mouth, not her eyes. First time I met her, she was standing at the edge of my driveway holding a clipboard. Didn't knock. Just stood there. I walked out and said, "Can I help you?" And she gave me that tight little smile and said, "I'm just making note of some exterior inconsistencies." I remember actually laughing a little. Inconsistencies. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. Your fence. It appears to exceed the visual harmony guidelines outlined in Section 4.3 of the Community Covenants. I leaned on the truck door and said, "It's a standard 6-foot privacy fence. Approved permit. Inspected by the county." She nodded slowly, like she was humoring me. "County approval and HOA compliance are 2 separate matters, Mr. Keller." That was the first time I realized this wasn't going to be one of those passive HOAs. About a week later, I got the first letter. White envelope, HOA letterhead, stamped and dated March 11th. Notice of noncompliance. They said my fence violated aesthetic continuity standards, that it disrupted the open visual character of the neighborhood. They gave me 14 days to remedy the issue. No explanation of how. No mention of prior approval process. Just fix it. I called the number listed at the bottom. Got Sharon. Aesthetic continuity? I said, "You've got at least 12 houses with fences just like mine." Her voice was calm, practiced. Those installations were either grandfathered in or received design approval prior to current enforcement standards. Current enforcement standards, I repeated. When did those change? There was a pause. Recently, she said. No date. No document. Just recently. I didn't ignore it. That's the thing people always assume, that homeowners just dig their heels in and refuse to cooperate. I didn't. I emailed. I asked for clarification. I requested documentation of the updated guidelines. I even offered to meet and review alternatives. What I got back was a second letter. April 2nd. This one came with a $250 fine. Continued noncompliance. Still no clear explanation. Still no actual violation tied to any recorded amendment. Just pressure. By late April, it escalated. Third letter. $750 fine. Threat of further enforcement action, including corrective measures at homeowner's expense. That's the phrase that stuck with me. Corrective measures. At my expense. At that point, my wife Megan sat me down at the kitchen table one night. Lucy already asleep, dishwasher humming in the background, and she said, "Aaron, is this really worth it? And I get it. From the outside, it probably looked like a stupid fight over a fence. But to me, it felt like something else. It felt like someone slowly pushing past a boundary, just to see how far they could go. And I said, if I let them decide what I'm allowed to build on my own property without showing me a single legitimate rule, then yeah, it's worth it. She didn't argue. She just nodded, but I could see it in her face. She was worried this wasn't going to end clean. Early May, I started noticing more activity. Drive-bys, photos being taken from the street. Once, I came home from work and there was a small orange tag zip-tied to one of the fence posts, like something you'd see on a marked tree. No explanation. Just there. I cut it off. Then came May 19th. That morning, the empty yard, the missing fence, and that bill, $14, $872.63, itemized down to labor hours, disposal fees, expedited contractor services. I remember just standing there, coffee going cold in my hand, heart beating a little too hard, like my body hadn't caught up with what my brain was trying to process. They hadn't just fined me. They had come onto my property, torn down a structure I paid for, permitted, built legally, and then billed me for it. I called Sharon. Didn't even wait to get inside. She picked up on the second ring. You had my fence removed? I said. Her tone didn't change. The association exercised its right to enforce compliance after repeated notices. You didn't have the right to step onto my property. We absolutely do under the covenants you agreed to upon purchase. I closed my eyes for a second, tried to keep my voice level. You're sending me a $15,000 bill for destroying my property. Correcting a violation, she said. Not destroying. That's when something in me shifted. Not anger, not exactly. Something colder, more focused. Because I'd spent almost 2 decades reading plats, easements, land use codes, and there was one thing I knew for damn sure. People who talk like that usually haven't read the fine print nearly as closely as they think they have. I looked back out at my yard, at the clean, raw line of dirt where the fence posts used to sit, at the gaps where my daughter used to play safely. And I realized this wasn't about arguing with Sharon anymore. This was about figuring out exactly where her authority ended, and whether she'd just crossed a line she couldn't walk back from. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I laid there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it tick every time it made a full rotation, and I kept replaying the same thing over and over in my head. Not the fence, not even the money. The confidence in her voice. We absolutely do. People don't say that unless they believe it, or unless they've never actually been challenged. Around 2:30 in the morning, I got up, went downstairs, and pulled my old survey folder out of the cabinet in the garage. It was one of those thick, accordion-style files I hadn't touched since we bought the house 3 years earlier. Closing documents, inspection reports, plats, easement maps, everything. I spread it all out across the kitchen table, flipped on the overhead light, and just started going through it piece by piece. Slow, methodical, the way I do it on a job. By 5:15 a.m., I had a headache, 2 empty coffee mugs, and a growing feeling in my chest that I couldn't quite name yet. Because something was off. Not obvious. Not like a big flashing red flag. More like a detail that didn't match the story I'd been told. See, most people think property lines are clean, simple boxes. They're not. They're layered. You've got your lot boundary, then setbacks, then utility easements, drainage rights-of-way, sometimes even access strips that nobody thinks about until they matter. And in Brook Hollow Ridge, like a lot of subdivisions built in the early 2000s, there was a standard 10-foot utility easement running along the rear of every lot. Most people never notice it. It's just grass. But legally, it's not entirely yours. And that's where things started to click. I pulled out the original plat map, the one stamped and recorded with Wake County back in 2003, and laid it flat on the table. Then I grabbed a ruler, measured from the rear property line inward, 10 feet. Then I cross-referenced that with my fence placement from memory, post spacing, distance from the back corner of the house, everything. And I just sat there for a second. Because if I was right, my fence wasn't violating HOA rules. My fence was sitting inside a recorded utility easement. Now, that might not sound like a big deal if you're not in this line of work. But here's the thing. HOAs don't control easements. They can regulate aesthetics on your lot, sure. But easements? Those fall under county jurisdiction, sometimes even utility companies. Meaning Sharon and her clipboard didn't have authority there. At all. At 7:45 that morning, I was in my truck heading downtown. Wake County Register of Deeds office opens at 8:30, but I like being early, gives you time to think. The building itself is nothing fancy. Brick exterior, older structure, smells faintly like paper and dust and government funding that ran out about 15 years ago. Inside, it's quiet. Rows of terminals, a couple clerks behind the counter, fluorescent lights that hum just enough to get under your skin if you're there too long. I went straight to the public records terminal, pulled up my property. Then I started digging. Deed history, subdivision filings, easement recordings, amendments, anything tied to Brook Hollow Ridge. Time kind of blurred after that. Clicking through scanned documents, zooming in on signatures, reading legal descriptions that most people would glaze over in 5 seconds. I wasn't looking for something dramatic. I was looking for consistency. And the more I looked, the less consistent things got. Around 10:10 a.m., I found it. A supplemental filing from 2004. Easy to miss unless you knew what to search for. It was an amendment to the original subdivision plan. Expanded the utility easement in certain rear lots, including mine, from 10 feet to 12. 12 feet. I leaned back in the chair and just exhaled slowly. Because I knew exactly where my fence sat. Right at about 11.5 feet. Meaning the entire structure. Every single post. Was inside an easement the HOA had zero authority over. I printed everything. Stamped copies. Made duplicates. Then I sat there for another 20 minutes, just organizing it into a clean timeline. Because knowing something isn't enough. You have to be able to prove it, clearly, simply, in a way nobody can twist. On the way out, I ran into someone I didn't expect. His name's Walter Briggs. 72, retired surveyor, lived in Brook Hollow since the place was first built. Kind of guy who still wears suspenders and calls everyone son, whether they're 20 or 50. He saw the stack of papers in my hand and said, "You look like a man who just found something interesting." I gave a half smile. Depends how you define interesting. He nodded toward the papers. Easement issue. I stopped for a second. Yeah. He chuckled softly. They forget about those. Always do. We ended up sitting on a bench outside for about 15 minutes. I showed him the amendment. He didn't even need to read the whole thing. Just glanced at the header, the parcel number, and nodded. Yup, he said. They've got no business touching anything in that zone. They already did, I said. That got his attention. He looked up at me. Eyes sharper now. They what? I told him. Fence gone. Invoice. HOA enforcement. All of it. He listened without interrupting, just tapping his thumb lightly against his knee. When I finished, he let out a slow breath and said, "Well, they didn't just step over a line, son." He tapped the paper. They bulldozed right through one. That was the first moment I felt it shift. Up until then, it was me reacting, trying to understand what had happened. But sitting there, hearing it from someone who'd spent 40 years mapping land boundaries, it became something else. A problem with a solution. Before I left, Walter said, "If you're going to push this, don't do it halfway." I wasn't planning to, I said. He nodded. Good. Because people like that, they double down before they back off. Next stop was a small office park off Glenwood Avenue. Second floor, end unit. A real estate attorney named Lisa Chun. I'd worked adjacent to her on a couple development projects over the years, never directly, but I knew her reputation. Sharp. Efficient. Didn't waste time. Her office was exactly what you'd expect. Clean desk. Organized files. No clutter. She looked at the documents for maybe 3 minutes before she said, "Okay, this is actually worse than you think." I raised an eyebrow. That's not usually how people start good news. She gave a slight smile. It's good for you, not for them. She turned one of the pages toward me. See this clause here, under North Carolina General Statute 47F-3-102. I leaned in. HOAs can enforce covenants, but they cannot exercise authority over areas outside their defined jurisdiction, including recorded easements unless explicitly granted. She tapped the page lightly. They weren't. Then she flipped to the next document. Now here's where it gets interesting. Notice requirements. She pulled out a printed copy of a statute and slid it across the desk. Before any enforcement action that results in charges or property alteration, they are required to provide documented notice, an opportunity for a hearing, and a defined cure period. I looked up at her. They sent letters. She shook her head. Letters aren't enough if they don't meet statutory requirements, and based on what you showed me. She leaned back slightly. They skipped at least 2 steps. I sat there for a second, just letting it settle. So what are we looking at? Lisa folded her hands on the desk. They trespassed. They destroyed property in a jurisdiction they don't control. They billed you for it without due process. She paused. If you want to be blunt about it, they handed you a case. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And the contractor? I asked. She tilted her head. Did they pull a county permit for removal? I almost laughed. No. Then that's another violation, she said. County code enforcement will love that. By the time I walked out of her office, the air felt different. Same street, same traffic, but everything in my head had shifted from reaction to strategy. That afternoon, I drove back home. Slower this time, more deliberate. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a minute, looking at the open yard. No fence, no barrier, just space. Then I saw Sharon's car parked 2 houses down. Silver Acura, polished like always. And for the first time since all this started, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood something she didn't. She thought this was about a fence. She thought she was enforcing rules. She thought she had control. What she didn't realize, not yet, was that she had just triggered something a whole lot bigger than a compliance issue. The next morning, I didn't call Sharon. I didn't send an email, didn't argue, didn't try to work it out. I went straight to the county. Wake County Code Enforcement sits in this low, concrete building off Rock Quarry Road. Nothing fancy, but if you've ever dealt with them, you know, they don't play around when it comes to permits and unauthorized work. I walked in with a folder about an inch thick, plats, easement records, HOA letters, photos of my yard before and after, even the invoice they left zip-tied to my gate. The woman at the front desk glanced at it and said, "You filing a complaint or opening an investigation?" I said both. By 11:30 that morning, I was sitting across from an inspector named Daniel Ruiz. Mid-40s, calm, no nonsense, the kind of guy who listens more than he talks. He flipped through my documents slowly, stopping every now and then, asking short, precise questions. Fence was fully within this easement line? Yes. No hearing notice from HOA? No. Contractor listed here. You verify permit? I checked this morning. Nothing filed. He nodded once. Then he closed the folder and said something I won't forget. All right. Yeah, this is a problem. 2 days later, Thursday, just before noon, I got a call. Mr. Keller? This is Inspector Ruiz. We're going out to your property this afternoon. You'll want to be there. That was it. No details. No tone. Just be there. By 2:15, there were 3 county vehicles parked along my curb. 1 code enforcement truck, 1 planning and zoning SUV, and, interestingly enough, a sheriff's deputy sitting in the third. Not lights on, just present. Sharon showed up about 10 minutes later. Pulled in a little faster than usual, parked half on the curb, stepped out with that same clipboard in her hand like it was some kind of shield. But she wasn't smiling this time. Ruiz didn't waste time. He walked the property, took measurements, checked the plat I handed him against the physical layout, paced out the easement line himself, boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt where the fence used to be. Then he turned to Sharon. "Ma'am, can you explain under what authority this structure was removed?" She straightened up a bit. The association acted under its covenant enforcement rights. Ruiz cut her off. "This structure," he said, tapping the ground with his boot, "was located within a recorded utility easement. Your association has no jurisdiction here." You could actually see the moment it hit her. Not fully, but enough. She blinked once, then said, "Our legal interpretation." He shook his head. "This isn't interpretation. It's recorded land use." I stayed quiet. Didn't interrupt. Didn't need to. Then he pulled out a notepad. "Additionally, we found no record of a removal permit filed with the county for this work." Sharon hesitated. "It was handled through a private contractor, which still requires a permit," Ruiz said. The deputy shifted slightly beside his vehicle. Didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Ruiz continued, calm as ever. "And based on what I'm seeing here, the homeowner was not provided proper notice or opportunity for a hearing under North Carolina statute before enforcement action was taken." He looked directly at her now. "That's a due process issue." There was a long pause. Wind moved through the trees behind us. You could hear someone mowing a lawn 2 houses down. Just normal afternoon noise. Except nothing about that moment felt normal. Sharon finally said, quieter now, "We were acting in the best interest of the community." Ruiz nodded once. I'm sure you believe that. Then he closed his notepad. But belief doesn't override jurisdiction. That was it. No yelling. No dramatic speech. Just facts. And somehow, that hit harder than anything else could have. Within 48 hours, the HOA received a formal notice of violation from the county. Unauthorized construction activity. Improper enforcement action. Jurisdictional overreach. Things moved fast after that. Faster than I expected. The following Monday, I got a call from a board member I barely knew. His name was Eric Dalton. You could hear it in his voice, the shift. No authority. No confidence. Just concern. Aaron. Hey, we'd like to sit down and talk about resolving this. We met 2 days later at the community clubhouse. Small room, folding chairs, one of those long plastic tables in the center. Sharon was there, but she looked different. No clipboard, no polished tone, just tired. Lisa, my attorney, sat next to me. Folder open, documents ready. Eric started. We want to find a way to move forward that works for everyone. Lisa raised a hand slightly. Let's be clear, she said, calm but firm. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a liability situation. Silence. Then she laid it out. Full reimbursement of the $14,872.63 invoice issued to my client. She slid a paper forward. An additional $8,200 for reconstruction of the fence based on current material and labor costs. Another paper. Removal of all violation records associated with this property. And one more. Written acknowledgement of improper enforcement action. Sharon finally spoke. Her voice was smaller. That's excessive. I leaned forward slightly. First time I'd spoken in that room. You came onto my property, I said, steady. Removed a structure you had no authority over and tried to charge me for it. I paused. That's not excessive. That's the cost. She looked at me for a second, like she was trying to decide whether to push back. Then she looked down at the table. Eric cleared his throat. We may also need to discuss leadership changes within the board. That was the moment it was over. Not legally, but practically. Within 2 weeks, everything was signed. Checks cleared. $23,072.63 total. Fence reconstruction started the following Monday. Sharon resigned. Didn't make a speech. Didn't send a farewell email. Just gone. The new board implemented changes almost immediately. Clearer guidelines. Mandatory legal review before enforcement actions. Actual communication with homeowners. And me? I rebuilt the fence. Same dimensions. Same placement. Every post set just inside that 12-foot easement line, measured twice, just to be sure. The first afternoon Lucy played in the yard again. I sat on the back steps, watched her run along the fence line, laughing like nothing had ever happened. And for the first time in weeks, everything felt quiet again. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. This wasn't really about a fence. Not for them. And not for me. For them, it was control. The idea that if you say something confidently enough, people won't question it. For me, it was about knowing where the line actually is. And what happens when someone crosses it, thinking you won't notice. I didn't win because I yelled louder. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I understood the system better than they expected me to. And I didn't back down when it mattered. Now I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have let it go after the first fine? Would you have paid the bill just to avoid the stress? Or would you have pushed it all the way like I did, knowing it could have gone sideways at any point? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because honestly, situations like this, they're never as simple as right or wrong. And I've learned, sometimes the line between those two is exactly where the real fight begins.